are here live on set at Bush Pig Adventures, and we're here to talk to you about everything to do with tyres. Hi folks, and welcome to this episode of Talking Everything Tyres with General Tyre. My experts Lance and Marcus with me, and in this episode we're going to be focusing on the impact of tyre pressures relating to heat buildup and how a tyre deforms, and certainly then when you introduce elements like speed, what happens. So we'll obviously be talking about from a safety perspective, also from a grip and traction perspective, and bringing in Marcus to talk about how it felt behind the wheel. I think first and foremost is let's just talk about the test that we did, Lance. I think it's important to have introduced certain pressures. So we started with a 2-bar scenario, we then went down to a 1.2 bar scenario, and then finally a 0.8 scenario. All of these elements tested on relatively hard gravel, so some stones, a harder surface, so no more sand. And just from a theoretical perspective, what does the tyre go through now when you're subjecting it speed, steering inputs at the different pressures?
I take an elastic band and I do this.
Yep.
What happens? It gets hot.
Yes.
No, we all know this, all right? And the same is applicable to the tyre. And the tyre doesn't like heat. Over a certain temperature, the tyre will start degrading. The tyre will literally break up. That's how simple it is.
We measured the different tyre temperatures at the different pressure scenarios. There tends to be a slightly exponential curve as the pressure drops off to a certain point.
Sure.
So I think we saw the difference between 2 bar and 1.2 bar wasn't as significant as the drop from 1.2 bar to 0.8.
And I think it really goes back to, I think your question really is why this exponential curve, and it really goes back to the stiffness of this specific tyre and the tyre carrying a portion of the load with the lower inflation is why we see this exponential curve. If we had to do it on a less rigid tyre, for example, we would again see a linear curve and we would see a lot higher heat buildup.
Now, Marcus, practically doing the driving and actually feeling the difference behind the wheel, the inputs that you were making relative to what the vehicle was then able to translate onto the gravel. Can you just explain the scenario from 2 bar to 1.2 to 0.8
Sure.
and what you felt?
Okay, so this was the fun part, was getting to drive at the same speed but with the different tyre pressures. So at 2 bars, I mean, you can see in the video how we were shaking all over the place in this vehicle. And what you will notice with a harder tyre, as I mentioned in a previous episode, where you end up with a lot of bouncing on the road, so your steering becomes incredibly light. It's very uncomfortable. Because the tyres are so hard, that is all coming right through the vehicles and you can feel it right through your bones. All your nuts and bolts that are holding your vehicle together are taking an immense amount of strain with all the vibrations that have been put through the vehicle.
And all your nuts and bolts.
And all your nuts and bolts as you're going as well. I mean, you can see how much stress and strain. Now the concentration as a driver is through the roof, which is where the fatigue starts setting in as well. Now when you start to drop your pressures, you drop it to 1.2. So we recommend between 1.2 and 1.5, depending on the weight that you are carrying in your vehicle. We went down to 1.2 and the difference was incredible. The comfort, you could see in the video how smooth it was. Any input, there was an immediate reaction because I had so much more surface area on the ground. I had so much give in the tyre, which the nuts and bolts stayed where they should.
Sure.
And your vehicle followed. So when you turned, you could feel the vehicle follow. It wasn't a delayed response. Then when we dropped to 0.8, it felt like a fishbowl. Because every time I was turning, I would turn, then the rear would follow. Then I would turn.
So it went the other way.
It was completely the other way. Yes, if I kept in a straight line, I didn't feel as many bumps, but if I hit a really big bump, you could feel it coming through the rim. Okay, so it was past the point of no return. You turned a corner, it was heavy, and you're like, oh, is this going to come off the rim?
Where we saw the deflection,
Yes.
as you were providing steering inputs to the vehicle, the tyre wasn't happy.
Yeah.
We could actually
So
see
as a driver, you don't feel comfortable that the rear is going to follow you. And now you swerve back and everything's delayed, so you get this real wishy-washy kind of feel. At that 1.2 to 1.5, what a pleasure. And as we've always said, there's 3 golden rules when you hit a gravel road, guys. Is number 1, deflate your tyres. Then put your vehicle in 4-wheel drive. If you have a 4x4, if you've got a 2x4 bakkie, don't put your diff lock on. Just make sure you deflate your tyres. But if you're in a 4-wheel drive, put it in 4 high range. And then, very important, turn your lights on. Make sure you have your lights on, not so that you can see, so that people coming through the dust towards you have view visual.
We also want to talk about the 3 golden rules at the end of the exercise.
Correct.
All right. For sure, it's safe for us to drive with our lights on permanently. So maybe that's not a topic, but for me, once we finish in the off-road conditions, we need to inflate the tires.
Correct. Vitally important, because what a lot of guys do as well is they go, oh, the garage is 10 k's up the road. I'll just drive on the road for 10 k's with 1.2 bars. Now, yes and no, because you can drive slowly and get there. However, your rolling friction, your heat buildup is going to be so much higher, and in those 10 k's, maybe you're doing 120 k's an hour. Yes, it's in a straight line, so you don't have to do the swerves and this, that, the next thing. However, if you do have to overtake, if you do have to swerve from something, your sidewall is going to have movement. You're going to have a delayed reaction because of the tar gripping straight away. But more importantly is the heat buildup in the tire. You're going to get degradation of your tires.
And I think you might not see the damage that you're causing, so you might think that it was fine. But I think part of that golden rule is if you are in a position where you don't have a compressor, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode, but certainly don't have a compressor, I have to drive the 10 k's to the garage, let me reduce my speed accordingly.
Correct.
So slow down to generate less friction,
Yep.
even if it takes a bit longer to get there safely, so that you don't impact or cause damage to your tires. Thanks very much for the inputs, and folks, thanks for watching this episode. And in the next episode, we'll be talking about all the equipment necessary before you start your off-road, your holiday, even if you're just going 4x4ing, there are some essentials that we're going to need to talk to you about and show you, especially when it relates to your tires. Thanks for watching.